What if you could send a message in a bottle to some of history's greatest minds and ask them to help us figure out our modern world? Well, that's kind of what we're going to do. We're going to look at a very modern crisis, the collapse of the global order, through the eyes of three legendary thinkers. And it all kicks off with this really chilling statement. It comes from a fictional diplomat, Victor Angelo, writing just a couple of years into our future. He looks around at the world in January 2026 and comes to a stark conclusion. The system, the one we've all been relying on for decades, it's gone. It's perished. That's a pretty heavy place to start, right? So for this thought experiment, we're going to pretend that this diplomat's letter doesn't just disappear. It actually gets answered. And not just by anyone, but by three thinkers with totally different, you could even say clashing views on power, on morality, and on the very fabric of existence. So yeah, let's jump in. First up, let's get inside the diplomat's head. What exactly is he seeing that would lead him to say something so final, so absolute? What does he feel has been lost? For our diplomat, Victor Angelo, this wasn't just some loose collection of treaties. No, for him, it was a cathedral. And I mean, just think about that metaphor for a second. A cathedral is something sacred, right? It's built over generations, piece by piece with care. It stands for a higher ideal of peace and cooperation. And in his eyes, that beautiful cathedral is now a pile of rubble. And this didn't just happen overnight. He actually traces the beginning of the end back to February 2022, when he says the whole system just fell into a comatose state. Then, through late 2025, you see these massive upheavals that just keep hammering away at the foundations, which brings us to his final grim declaration in early 2026. It's a clear and, to him, totally devastating timeline. And this is where you can really feel his anxiety, because the world he's describing is full of contradictions. On one hand, pure peril, moral decay, a UN that's been pushed to the sidelines. But then there are these little flickers of hope, talk of dialogue at Davos, a big trade deal getting signed. It's this messy mix of hope and peril that makes everything feel so incredibly uncertain. So the diplomat sends out his distress signal. Who answers first? Well, it's none other than Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who famously took a hammer to Western morality. His response is not what the diplomat was hoping for. Now, to get Nietzsche, you have to get his big idea, the will to power. And look, this isn't just about armies and conquering nations. For him, it's the basic, fundamental drive in everything. It's a flower pushing through concrete to reach the sun. It's an artist struggling to create a masterpiece. It's that constant drive to grow, to overcome, and to assert your strength. So, armed with this idea, Nietzsche doesn't even try to fix the diplomat's problem. He just throws it right back at him with a question. A simple but absolutely devastating question. He hears the order has perished, and he just asks, was it ever really alive to begin with? Or was it just this beautiful, shiny shadow of something whose time had already passed? For Nietzsche, the death of this order wasn't a tragedy. It was just the moment everyone finally realized the sun had gone down a long, long time ago. So here's Nietzsche's diagnosis. That beautiful cathedral the diplomat is mourning, it was never a cathedral. It was a cage, a really cleverly designed cage built by the weak to hold back the strong. All those rules, all those laws, that was just what he called herd morality, designed to keep the truly powerful, the truly creative from rising up. The chaos the diplomat fears? To Nietzsche, that's just the world finally taking off its mask. Okay, let's bring in our second voice, and we're going to pivot hard. We're moving from the will to power to a completely different philosophy, the will to truth, as seen through the eyes of Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi's key idea here is something called Swaraj, which means self-rule. But he's not talking about political power or borders. It's an internal thing. It's about having the moral courage and inner strength to be so centered in your own truth that the violence and threats of the outside world, they just can't touch you. So just like Nietzsche, Gandhi immediately questions the diplomat's cathedral, but he's coming at it from a totally different angle. He's not interested in power. He's interested in truth. He asks, was this whole grand system ever actually built on a solid foundation of morality? Or was it just a house of cards ready to get blown over by the slightest breeze? And that, right there, is Gandhi's entire diagnosis in one sentence. The system wasn't dying from a lack of rules. It was dying from a lack of soul. He argued that you can't have a rules-based order on the outside if you don't have a moral-based life on the inside. Basically, you can't expect to have peace in the world if you're not living a life of peace yourself. The whole thing was hollow. All right, for our third and final response, we're going way back in time to the ancient Chinese sage Lao Tzu. And he's going to offer a perspective that just kind of dissolves the entire argument. He's not interested in a will to power or a will to truth. He's interested in the will to flow. For Laozi, everything comes down to the Tao, or the way. Think of it like a massive cosmic river. It's the natural, effortless flow of everything in the universe. Now, you can't control the river. You can't command it to stop. The only thing you can do is learn to move with its current, to yield to it. And this is his classic example. What's stronger, the mighty oak tree or the soft willow? Well, the oak stands rigid and strong against the storm, and it snaps in half. The willow, on the other hand, is soft. It yields. It bends with the wind, and so it survives. The diplomat's order was the oak tree. So Lao Tzu gives us one last devastating reframe. He says, you see a cathedral? I don't. I see a dam. A massive, rigid, man-made structure trying to block the natural flow of the river of the world. And its collapse isn't some great tragedy. It's inevitable. It's just what happens when something that's too rigid tries to stop something that is meant to flow. The water is just going back to its natural course. So what do we do with all this? We've got three totally different takes on the same crisis. One philosopher sees a cage being broken, another sees a house of cards falling down, and the last one sees a dam bursting. Let's lay them all out side by side and think of them as three different maps for navigating this new, uncertain world. This really sums up the entire debate, doesn't it? The diplomat mourns his sacred cathedral. Nietzsche just sneers at what he sees as a clever mask. Gandhi sadly points to the flimsy house of cards, and Lao Tzu just shrugs at the broken pieces of a rigid dam. You see, what you thought the old order was changes everything about how you feel about its collapse. And that leads us to three very different paths forward. For Nietzsche, the problem is a crisis of will, so the solution is to be bold and create entirely new values. For Gandhi, the problem is a crisis of morality, so the solution is to look inward and live a moral life. And for Lao Tzu, the problem is that we resist change, so the solution is to stop fighting and learn to flow like water. You know, in the end, this isn't really about picking the right answer. What we have here are three incredibly powerful tools for thinking: the map of the power seeker, the map of the moralist, and the map of the sage. Each one gives us a profound way to make sense of the chaos. So the real question, the one I'll leave with you, is this: as the old world crumbles, which map are you going to use?